Welcome to the Blendr Report, where news meets rational thinking. I'm your host, Jonathan Harvey, and this is your co-host, Liam DeBoer. Liam, how you doing today, bro?
Good, man. Yeah, good to get back from the holidays and get back into the swing of things here.
So what are we going on about today?
A couple different stories and the overarching story of the fragmentation of Canada. From war-torn to rising hope, the Global Peace Index, the political scales continuing to tip as just 3.4% of journalists identify as Republican, and global disinformation warfare, so the censorship industrial complex exposed. Before we get into things, if you wouldn't mind heading over to our website to sign up for our newsletter at blendrnews.com, BLENDR news.com. That would be great. All right, let's get into things. All right, so first off here, a couple different stories with the fragmentation of Canada. It seems like provinces are starting to feel like they want to go their own way, that there's no no kind of consensus on the direction for Canada to take. I mean, we're seeing it just came out with Alberta's Danielle Smith tackling a pact agenda in 2024. Her top priority is revamping the $17 billion healthcare system, which includes dismantling Alberta Health Services and replacing it with 4 separate agencies, despite current concerns about potential fragmentation. And then, obviously, she's in a battle with the environmental minister, Stephen Guilbeault, over the green energy projects. And then we're also seeing her float the idea of Alberta exiting from the Canadian pension plan. Then on top of that, you see Saskatchewan Premier Scott Moe announcing that they won't be going along with the federal carbon tax anymore, that they're pretty much just giving a big middle finger to the federal government. And I mean, then we've always got the whole Quebec situation where
They're always ready to go.
Quebec is always ready to go.
Times.
And then you've got Ontario, which kind of feels like its own thing at this point in the East Coast. I don't know, what do you see happening with the future of Canada here? Is there...
Well, I mean, what I'm noticing is that a lot of these premiers are starting to behave like they're states down in the U.S. Mm-hmm. They're starting to take a little more autonomy. The reality, though, is I don't know how much flexibility they have or how much rope they have to have their own autonomy and how much they can do on their own. But we're going to find out this year, right? Danielle Smith is doing a lot of things that I think could potentially be a really good template for other premiers to follow. It's just a matter of how the chips fall. Now, it's interesting. If she were a liberal premier and she were doing things that were maybe a bit against the grain, I think she would still find a way to get a lot of support. But because she's not, I forget exactly, it's like a United Conservative. It's basically on the right, by comparison. Because she's not, she's already going to be met with pushback from the government, regardless of what the policies are. But she's doing a lot of good things for Canadians. I mean, when you look at the Canadian pension plan, I don't remember. You posted something on your story, and I'd seen that a few days before. When you do the math on the Canadian pension plan, it's basically like you're being robbed blind. Mm-hmm. You're putting in tons of money into a program when you work, and then you're being given a small fraction of that over a number of years once you retire. It's a terrible program, and the thing, it's really simple math to do, too, when you identify it and look at it. And I guess people just bought into it. I don't know if the numbers were different before. I don't know if you had to contribute less and got more. I'm not sure if people just feel like it's patriotic, so maybe they do it without really asking a lot of questions. But when you do, when you uncover how bad it really is, you can see why they want to get out. So I mean, there's a lot of validity to that. In terms of the healthcare crisis they have there, the whole country's having a healthcare crisis. I mean, we're spending $350 billion a year on healthcare, and it's a terrible, terrible system with a ton of holes. And the thing is, in general, I don't want to go too far down this line, but healthcare in general is a very broken system where we don't ever treat the root cause. And I don't want to blame physicians for what's happening necessarily, because they're just using the tools they were given and the education they were given. But what they do is, they get 6 to 9 minutes to see a patient. I went to see a doctor the other day for my ribs. Crack some ribs. That's why we didn't do a podcast last week. So the thing is, the guy was quick. Instead of going to my family doctor, I went into a clinic. Guy saw me for 1 minute. He's like, what's going on? I'm like, I fell, cracked some ribs, this, that, whatever. He's like, you need an MRI and you need an X-ray. Here you go, see ya. Gone. Like, okay, at the end of the day, I don't need someone to hold my hand. This is pretty cut and dry. But it sort of goes to show These people have to get you in and out, in and out, in and out. And that's just the model. That's what it's like. And it's the same in the United States. So what they do is, you go in there and you're like, you're a mom with 2 kids and you're exhausted because they're young and you're trying to keep up with work and do all this other stuff. And you go in there and you're just exhausted. The doctor's got 6 to 9 minutes. So they're not going to be able to treat the root cause. They're going to give you an antidepressant. They're going to give you something to sleep. And it's just going to get worse. And you're hooked in this medical system that isn't actually doing anything for you. And at the end of the day, I'm not really too sure what Danielle Smith's plan is, but doing anything to improve the current system we have seems like it's going in the right direction. You know what I mean? And then with respect to Stephen Guilbeault and her complaints about the environment, sort of the environmental, the climate proposals. What are they called?
Green agenda.
Yeah, sort of like Stephen Guilbeault and then his green agenda. None of it makes any sense. There are a lot of questions that need to be asked and a lot of science that needs to be shown. But here's how I feel about this. I know that you and I don't have all the answers on what's happening with climate change and what this means in terms of a crisis. Now, there's a lot of support for both sides, but in terms of proponents, it's mainly just louder voices. Mm-hmm. And why I say this is, and here's why. If the Earth is really coming to an end, if we're really doing that bad a job, right? The easy way to get everybody on side with doing the right things to fix it, right things in quotes, is to just show me unequivocal evidence that this is what's happening. And there's no way to make it go the other way unless we make these changes. But they don't have any of that information.
They'll repeat those lines and that rhetoric over and over again.
Sure,
but
no hard evidence, and that's the problem, right? And that's why this is a debate.
There's a couple good books that people can dive into. I mean, Michael Schellenberger, he's great. An ex-environmental activist who used to fight on the side of these things, who then did a big deep dive into it and found that the science didn't exactly support these talking points. He wrote a book called Apocalypse Never. Bjorn Lomborg wrote a great book called False Alarm, more from an economic standpoint about how the current green agenda, even if it does fix the problems it aims to on the environmental front, the economic catastrophes it's going to cause will far outweigh anything it solves. And then there's another great one from Steve Koonin, who was he was a advisor for the Obama administration on environmental policy, and he wrote one called Unsettled, which was fantastic as well, where he breaks down the actual IPCC reports, which is what the UN uses for all of their data on climate change, and just how even their own data does not support the rhetoric that their claims that they're coming to.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, for me, I guess what I would say then, just to kind of wrap up my point, is you're seeing all these things that Premier Smith is doing in Alberta. And now you're seeing Scott Moe push back and basically say, hey, look, we're not doing the carbon tax either. Because again, look, if it were really true, first of all, they'd be using the carbon tax to fight environmental, problems, which they're not at all. And then you wouldn't be able to give the break to the people in Atlantic Canada, because what you're saying is those people's votes matter more than the environment. So I'm glad you're starting to see these premiers push back. What I think is happening is our prime minister, from the top down, our leadership is not doing a good job of running this country, and it's becoming more evident. So you're starting to get our premiers push back, and they're the newer ones that are, kind of on a bit of a crusade, and it's good to see, because I think they're actually going to help make Canada a better place. So I hope now that more premiers sort of jump on this bandwagon and they go, look, here's our opportunity to get our voice heard, because there's power in numbers, and this is how we can make Canada a better place for the citizens, as opposed to what Trudeau's been doing for the last 8 or 9 years. So again, my big question, or my big blind spot here rather, is I just don't know how much rope they have, and I don't know what kind of flexibility they're going to get from the federal government, how hard they're going to come down on them. Like, I just don't know enough about that. But in my opinion, you're seeing it fragment, and if you're paying attention to it, it's fragmenting in 2 ways, and it's obviously, it's going one towards these premiers, which are all seemingly doing the right things for Canadians, and then your federal government, who by and large, seems to be going the opposite direction and doing things that are harming Canadians and harming the economy. So it's a good thing to see. And if nothing else, hopefully they put up a big enough fight so that this information can come out at scale.
Yeah. And see, to me, when we even talk about the interest of Canadians, it's such it's a hard framing for me to go along with, just because thinking about how the interests of Albertans compared to the interests of Ontarians to people from Quebec or out east, they're all different.
Sure,
The lifestyles are completely different. The culture is different. The economies are different.
Yep.
So they're going to need different goals and pursuits. And I just have a major issue with this top-down ruling approach that we see happening from the federal government, which is, we know what's best for all of Canada, and all of Canada needs to follow our one agenda. And I mean, even from a business perspective, when you get a tyrannical manager in, or CEO or whatever, that doesn't really understand the operatings of, say, certain departments or aspects, but they have it in their idea that they know exactly what is best for this company, and they won't listen to any of those inputs from those levels, things can go bad very quickly because they also don't have the feedback. I mean, if you think about it, even the smartest person on earth that has ever existed didn't know 99.9999% of things there are to know.
Right.
So in reality, the best way to manage or govern in general is to have as many incoming data points as possible. And that is what the idea of a free market is you allow as many individuals to operate with what they think is best and to pursue their best interests. And I can't help but to feel that this is what we're going to see is starting a pushback against that idea of top-down approach, where you do see these premiers go, you know what? No, I'm not going along with the rest of what Canada's doing. Then if you want to impose that on everyone else, that's fine. But my people are here and they're struggling right now, and this is what they need.
Yeah, I mean, I think you make a really good point, and I appreciate the analogy. You look at it as a corporate structure, because at the end of the day, that's what this is. You've got your CEO being Trudeau, but the reality is a good CEO knows how to put the right people in the right places so that each department operates effectively. And if they try to do every job and tell everybody how to do everything, the business is going to fall apart or have no success. And I think if you look at the numbers, that's exactly what Trudeau has been doing, and that's why Canada is having no success.
And even too, actually, what I found one of the most interesting things, and Peter Zeihan was the one that pointed this out in a video that was really good, where he was talking about Canada is very terrible at trading with one another. So our provinces, all of our leading trading partners are America from the provinces. We almost do, like, our free trade agreements within the country are fucking terrible, man. Like, we actually don't share them out around resources and trade interprovincially at all, really. And it's striking when you go look at it, because there's never been an actual framework for that to be put in place. And so I look at that going, like, that seems to me like a major issue. Like, why are we out here dealing with third parties when you could keep a lot of it, or at least what you need to, in-house?
Yeah.
And it just doesn't seem to be going that way.
That's interesting. You think that's because of the dollar value in the United States? Like, do you think that's why? Mainly because I'm trying to think of, like, I'm trying to identify, like, even if there weren't agreements in place, right? If it makes sense to trade within your own border or within provinces, what's the deterrent? Like, why go another direction? It's got to be monetary, right?
Well, you could look at one issue, for instance, with, say, pipelines in Canada, where, let's say, Alberta's economy is very largely centered around oil and fossil fuel production. So, but then you've got, like, how are they supposed to trade with places like Nova Scotia and all this kind of stuff when Quebec will constantly block any attempt at a pipeline? So Alberta says, all right, well, you know what? We've got America just south of us here. We've got a border with America that they're willing to build pipelines with us. So we're just going to go down south. And I think it's a lot of stuff like that where, how I'm sure there's different issues for different provinces, but it seems to me like that could lead to a lot of those kind of issues.
So, like, policy and bureaucracy essentially are getting in the way. Like, less even than maybe an agreement. It's the fact that from an infrastructure perspective, we've done fuck all to help facilitate this.
Yeah. And then you look at it and you go, like, okay, because, say, Quebec's stance on pipelines is stopping Alberta from supplying Canada its oil, then you're like, okay, well, then now we've got the East Coast buying a lot of its oil from overseas.
Right.
And it's like, why are we giving, like, Russia and these overseas nations or Middle Eastern nations that we're essentially starting to go to geopolitical battle with?
Yeah.
Why are we funding them when we could keep it in-house here?
Yeah, I agree with that. Actually, we do a very poor job of even utilizing our own resources. And I mean, Trudeau's been under a lot of fire for that with, like, the natural gas thing, because we could be a world leading producer, And we had opportunities to get contracts over in Europe during this last crisis, and he just basically balked at everything. But I mean, one of the reasons I'm sure is because it takes like, based on our red tape, it takes like 7 years to get anything to market from the day you decide to do it in that industry. And that is such a wild mess. I just don't know how it gets fixed. You know, I look at all these problems and I'm like, what do you do to improve the situation? Because the thing is, you look at a guy like Javier Milei, you know what I mean? Like in Argentina. Obviously, we have too much structure in place already for someone like that to come in. It would just be too disruptive. Like I say, Canadian politics are magnetized, so someone that's that far outside like the Overton window, like he just would not be accepted. But like, what do you actually do to improve the situation? Because I hate to say it, but it feels rather hopeless some days.
Yeah. No, I mean, I'm right there with you, and I don't like being in that spot. Like, I mean, I tend to go towards a more cynical lens, but it is mind-boggling as to even some of those issues. Like, say we talk about Canada could be a leading producer in natural gas that could very well bolster our economy, create a lot of jobs, all of this kind of stuff.
Pull us out of debt.
Yeah,
Like,
pull us out
it's
of debt. Yeah.
wild.
But then you look at the reasonings for why, and we go back to the green agenda.
Right.
Well, natural gas isn't part of the sustainable development goals. But then I sit there and scratch my head and you go, natural gas and fracking, yes, has its downsides, but look at what America did when they started implementing natural gas. It's what allowed them to bring down their output in carbon emissions by 15%.
Right.
Like, natural gas was the reason that America, like, so you're like, to me, it looks at one of those things where you're like, yes, okay, there's costs to natural gas, but they aren't as bad as the costs for, say, extremely crude oil or coal or
Right.
any of these, or biomass, any of these other options. But because it's not a perfect solution, it's not a solution worth pursuing.
And that's
you go like,
that's the
fuck
big
off.
problem, because I think you got to look at this. It's a complex problem that we got here over a lot of years. And I think now that we can look at energy through a different lens. You know, I think when they started using oil, the lens they had was energy. If you don't use it, then you got to use 25, 30 guys to use the machine that I'm using. So one or the other, you're going to use it. I don't think they really thought about the problems they would have further down the road. Humans are really bad at that. We're not good at identifying long-term problems. But now we're here. So then when we look at something like natural gas, we can say, okay, look, we know what happened with oil. So if we have a target in mind, we want to reduce emissions. Great, let's do this. That sounds like a good idea. Why don't we go, okay, there's a 50-year target with natural gas. It's going to make this improvement. At year 20, we have to start implementing these programs because it is a stepped program. You're not going to have a perfect solution, because all you're doing when you look at these perfect solutions like EVs, you're just sending all your environmental damage offshore. You're sending all your CO2 emissions somewhere else. They're like having to mine for these precious metals or actually building these EVs. Like, I know the number's going to be a little bit wrong, and I think people throw it around a lot, but I think I can safely say you have to drive an EV for over like 100,000 miles before it actually breaks even on its environmental footprint. So it's like, that's not a perfect solution either. And that's what kind of makes me feel like these people are just doing things to virtue signal. They're there for 4 to 8 or 9 or 10 years, however long these assholes in power. And they just want to get their picture on the wall and make a name for themselves. They don't really want to fix the problem for the rest of us who are here for potentially our entire lives. And maybe that's just a big problem with the system itself.
Yeah.
You know, maybe it's just the macro solution to this is the whole fucking empire's got to fall, people. Maybe that's what it is.
Well, I mean, we're seeing globalization fall, that's for sure. And actually, that kind of brings us into our next topic, which is From War-Torn to Rising Hope, the Global Peace Index. So when we look around the world, we often wonder, is the grass really greener somewhere else? Do these foreign lands offer peace compared to our own familiar struggles? Well, the Global Peace Index offers some valuable insights to explore these questions and bridge the gap between the opinions we may have and the complex realities of life around the world. So some of the interesting kind of bullet point takeaways I grabbed here from that in the newsletter was global peacefulness declined by almost 0.5%, marking the 13th deterioration in the last 15 years. The disparity between the most and least peaceful countries continues to grow. So the 25 least peaceful countries saw a 9.8% average deterioration since 2008, while the 25 most peaceful countries improved by just 0.1%. The global economic impact of violence in 2022 was $17.5 trillion, representing 12.9% of global GDP. The war in Ukraine led to a 479% increase in its economic impact, the largest among all countries. Conflicts in Mali, Myanmar, and Ukraine escalated, contributing to 2022 being the deadliest year for armed conflict since 1994. And the top 5 peaceful countries were Iceland, Denmark, Ireland, New Zealand, and Austria, with the bottom 5 being Afghanistan, Yemen, Syria, South Sudan, and the Congo. So what are your thoughts on the Global Peace Index and the trends with tensions worldwide?
I feel like it should be called the Global War Index.
Yeah.
For starters.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, I thought it was a really interesting report to kind of work through, and because of all the data points, it gave me a more clear picture of sort of how they're identifying peace around the world. And the reason I thought that was important is because I think we look at a lot of information and we kind of live in our own silos. And I think what happens is, whether it be confirmation bias or algorithm driven, I'm not really too sure, maybe both, you sort of continue to see the world the way you want to see it, especially these different countries. Megan and I, my wife and I, we were considering moving to the States over the last few years because of how terrible things were here. And it wasn't for it was primarily due to Trudeau and what happened through COVID and the very authoritarian sort of measures he was taking. And then kind of what I knew was inevitably going to happen with the economy and everything like that. So, we're thinking all right, well, maybe we'll move to the States. Now, we made the decision not to do it for a myriad of reasons. But this report actually highlighted something really interesting for me. Canada finished 11th. Canada finished 11th in the world in terms of global peace. And I know a lot of our listeners or our viewers, or even you and I, we think of Canada as kind of a broken country. And I think it is broken in a lot of ways. But in terms of peace, it's actually a good wake-up call to be like, yeah, country's fucked in a lot of ways, but it's relatively safe still. It is. You have these odd instances and these things that they highlight in the media to make things seem worse than they really are. Like, the other day with the RCMP and the terrorist stuff, it's kind of bullshit. Like, fuck off. They're painting a picture because they want to implement policy. But pretty much at scale, Canada's is safe and it is continuing to improve. It was 13th last year. It's 11th this year. When you look at the United States, they're 131st out of 163 countries and area. Like 131st. That is such a red flag.
It's the cost of being the world police.
That's so it's just it's insane. I'm scanning through this thing and I'm like, next page. I'm like, do I not know how to read? Like, what's going on here? Even the UK, I think, was in the 50s. So I was really, really surprised to see those countries that far down the list. And it was a good wake-up call. It was like, look, I guess what I would say is this. We all have plans for a better life, whether that's here or somewhere else. I think humans, if you had to identify what humans are, they're creatures that try to progress. That's what we do. But seeing this report actually was a good reminder that while we're making these plans, whether it be here or to go somewhere else, despite all of the shit we deal with from a political perspective, we're in a pretty safe place. And if you don't have that, you don't know if you're going to make it to your next chapter. You know what I mean? You and I are pretty capable, so I don't really think you and I have to worry too much. But we don't really, the random violence, all the gun stuff, everything that happens in the States, that was one of the main reasons we didn't want to go. We're this is crazy. Want
to hear a crazy stat, though, is if you take out the top 5 leading cities for gun violence in America, gun violence, they would drop to the top 10 safest countries as far as gun violence per capita. So in 4 out of those top 5 leading cities all have the most amount of gun control. So places like Chicago, Detroit, California, all of this. And then so it's it's kind of, there's a few hot pockets in America that skew it for the rest of the nation.
I agree with you. I mean, but still, they use a pretty comprehensive system here to sort of identify what marks these things as safe and not safe. And don't get me wrong, look, it's still made by a human putting data together, so there's going to be some bias. I think in general, what I would say is it was just a good wake-up call for me as a Canadian to say, hey, a lot of things here aren't great, but at least that's not doing too bad for us, despite what we may see in the media and despite what we may think. And, it also made me sort of second guess, or not really second guess, but just rethink my strategy to leave the country and, try to build somewhere else. Just in, having a family, all these other things that are going to be happening in our lives in the next few years. Yeah, it was just a good wake up call in that sense. So I appreciated it for that. You know?
Yeah, and that's good. One of the crazy things that I just learned the other day that about Canada's position with all of that as well is that we only have enough ammunitions for 3 days of battle.
We're not well prepared for fighting.
No, and that's actually a big reason, because a lot of this peace index isn't necessarily just crime rates within the countries, but also their relationships with foreign countries.
Militarization,
right? Militarization, and all this kind of stuff. And that's something you've seen for a very long, like Canada has said it's never been interested in being a nuclear power. And I think that's also why you see America and the UK both kind of say lower on the totem pole, is because both of them are very much of the mindset of like, no, we want to have a stake in the way that the rest of the world operates.
Right.
And if something in, say, Africa, like with the UK a lot, they've got a lot of historical ties down there, or the Middle East, same thing with America. And you see them, if something in a certain region isn't going the way they want it to, they're not too scared to get involved, whether it be funding certain groups in those areas or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think thing with the States, you make a good point, is they build their economy off their military industrial complex, right? So they're basically the biggest bully in the yard looking for a fight.
Yeah.
And I think that's why they have a lot of it. Like, obviously, I know I was talking about their gun violence domestically, but yeah, I mean, look, everywhere you go, if there's a conflict, the United States is there, no matter what. Like, they're on Finland's border with Russia. They're bolstering now. They've got the warships in the Red Sea. They've got them in the Taiwan Strait. They're all over the place fighting with people. It's what they do. And I mean, I think they've overstayed their welcome in that role, and I think that's a big contributing reason why. But then back to Canada. Yeah, I mean, we're supposed to spend, I think, I'm not sure if the agreements with the UN or one of the G groups, G7s, G20 or something, we're supposed to be spending 2% of our GDP on our military. We're spending like 1.1. Like, it's absolute nonsense. We're not even meeting that threshold, and it's not even that high. So we are not ready for war by any means. But, war for what? We're a country of 40 million people.
Yeah.
And not for nothing, a lot of our current population is first-generation immigrants. Like, what would you say, 10 to 15 million?
Yeah, quite a lot.
Right. So how do you mobilize? And then you start kind of whittling it down. You're like, how do you mobilize this country for a war? Because no matter where you have the war, you're going to have people for and against it. So it's kind of like this weird thing that happens. It's like two sides of the same coin, I guess. And maybe that's the wrong analogy. On one side, you want to be the most multicultural country in the world, but as soon as you flip that over, then you really can't get involved in a lot of global conflicts because you're going to piss off a lot of your own people. So, like, you have to sort of pick and choose your fights. And I guess, for better or worse, Canada chose the immigration route. You know what I mean?
Which is, it's funny to think about Canada's history too, because I don't think people know how the Canadians were pretty. I mean, you could say badass, but you could also say maybe war criminals during World War I and World War II.
100%, dude.
Dude, we did some shady shit. Like, we were not scared. I remember I was reading an article about I see it go around every single year about how during Christmas in World War II, there was that famous treaty where it wasn't like an official treaty, but all of the soldiers kind of laid down their weapons for a night, met in the middle of no man's land, played some soccer, exchanged some gifts, all of this kind of stuff, right? Well, I read for the first time this year, I came across a story where I was reading where Canada said, fuck all that, and was just like still fighting people. And they were just like, they were kind of like, there was an unspoken peace for the night, and Canada was like, no, we're still fucking you up. And
people are gonna die today.
Yeah,
like, oh,
and so shit like that. And so yeah, Canada. But and then to your point too about America being the world police, I don't think a lot of people realize as well that with America's history, they were founded on being very anti-imperialist. They were also founded on the notion of not sticking their nose in other people's business.
Right.
Like, we just stay where we are. Even if you look at the policies that the presidents were taking before they actually officially entered World War I and World War II, they were very non-interventionalist. Like you can look back, there was letters being sent at the beginning of World War I to all of the European countries being like, guys, cut this shit out. You guys are about to go to war over who owns what. Like, you're going to bring mainland Europe into all-out war because of who owns what piece of land in Africa.
Yeah.
And all of this. Like, come on, cut it. Like, don't be ridiculous. Even in World War II, they didn't get involved until the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor. That was their impetus, but they did everything they could to possibly stay out of it before then. And then, I mean, you just see the economic benefit that America got after World War II, where they essentially were supplying all of Europe. Like, there's a great saying that, yeah, World War II was won with British intelligence, Russian blood, and American steel. And it's like America's industries, like you were talking about, were built on the military-industrial complex. Yeah. Even a lot of the major companies that you see now, like even I was doing videos for a different client of mine, and we were talking about how the history of certain trucking companies, and all of those trucking companies, whether it be like PACCAR or Kensworth, all of this kind of stuff, dude, they all got their start from military funding.
Yeah.
And they were just able to then build a company that had different aspects after the war finished. But you see it now where you just go like, you know, how does America pull itself out of that position? They've kind of...
I don't think they can. I think the problem is we've come to a place in the world where you pretty much have to be armed to the teeth because the next guy is, you know, and I think we've also come to a time where the superpower doesn't fall anymore. Someone else just joins them at the table, right? But the only way you keep your seat at the table is through militarization. It's the only way.
Yeah.
So it's not going anywhere. There's no chance. It doesn't matter what the trillions of debt look like. It doesn't matter about anything else. They are going to continue to be armed to the teeth. The only thing you might see is they may curtail their involvement in sort of the global landscape over the next decade. I think primarily because the world is going to separate into two factions, your East and your West. And I think what's going to happen is you're going to have this ongoing tension between both sides. But if there's conflicts within each sides, their own referees will manage it. So if you have a conflict in what we will call the West for now, I think the United States gets involved. If there's a conflict just within the Eastern countries in the East, I think China gets involved or Russia gets involved. Someone goes in there and kind of plays referee. But they'll still be ready for any time things start to kick off between, you know, if a small East and a small West go, the United States is there. So in a sense, it's not really going anywhere. I think it just may redistribute a little over the next decade.
Speaking about the East right now, Taiwan and China, in a tense lead up to Taiwan's crucial elections on January 13th, Chinese President Xi Jinping reiterated his claim that Taiwan will, quote, surely be reunified with China, which is a more assertive message than and a departure from his last year's more conciliatory tone. So that is something that I see definitely amping up overseas, the whole Taiwan-China tension. And that is something that I think America would get involved in a hot war, maybe sending their own troops in, because Vivek has done a great job of pointing this out before, where it's a lot different than Israel and Palestine or Ukraine and Russia, where Taiwan, I know America is starting to build its own chip processing plants, but for the moment, they are still everything is very dependent on these chips coming out of Taiwan. So it's a matter of national security for America, where their whole economy could crumble if they can't continue to get these resources from Taiwan. And then you see China, looking to start maybe strong-arming that. And another point from that global peace index that I thought was extremely interesting was a hypothetical Chinese blockade of Taiwan is estimated to result in a global GDP decline of 2.8%, which was twice the impact of the 2008 global financial crisis. So how worried are you of Taiwan and China with that?
Well, I think that so far there seems to be a bit of a barter system going on between China and the U.S. as to what's happening with Taiwan. Taiwan can pretend like they have a choice in the matter, but they don't, right? They really don't, right? So what I'm identifying is that the United States obviously wants to hang on to Taiwan for X number of years or months, no matter what, before maybe it does get reconstituted or whatever with China. And between now and then, I think what they're going to do is they're just going to push back and forth from a diplomatic level on the background and say, okay, like we're taking it. I think at the end of the day, Taiwan is going to be part of China again. It's just a matter of when. And I think because it's been this sort of negotiating point over the last however long it's been, I've really only known it to be a hot issue for the last 5-7 years, but I have a blind spot there. So this could have been an issue.
Actually, I was going to break down the history of Taiwan and China because it's pretty deep. It goes back 70 plus years.
Right.
So
I just mean in terms of the conflict between the United States and China being involved in it. But if you want to go ahead, if you want to go on the history lesson, feel free.
Because I mean, it is interesting, and this is where you see these conflicts pop up, and people want to make it seem like they came out of nowhere, and it's very easy to cut in line as to who the right party and who the wrong party is, who the good and evil are. And the China and Taiwan one is a crazy one as well, because when China was coming out of feudalism in the early 1900s, alongside a lot of other Eastern nations like Russia and such, they were having their own revolution of their own with Mao and the Chinese Communist Party, and their opposition was the Nationalist Party led by a guy named Chiang Kai-shek. And so what ended up happening was these two political parties, Mao and Chiang Kai-shek, were trying to fight over who was going to take China out of feudalism and whether they were going to kind of take a more pro-capitalist with the nationalist approach or whether they were going to go a communist approach and follow the likes of Lenin and Russia. And essentially what happened was Mao chased the National Party out of China, like militarily.
Yeah.
They were at war. It was a civil war. And they chased them out of China, and that Nationalist Party went and offshored on Taiwan. They essentially went and took their own, like, which was part of China.
Yeah.
And so they went and landed in Taiwan and said, okay, we're safe here on this little island. We're away from all the communists. And so it's never been officially its own independent country. It's a very weird situation that's going on.
It's weird, yeah. From what I understand, people argue like, oh, it was never a part of China. It's like, no, it was, but it wasn't a part of the new rule in China.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, where people get a little confused there. But so it's interesting, like when you look at that. But do you know how long this conflict has been a hot topic issue between the United States and China? Obviously, it's however long Taiwan's been of value to the U.S. I just don't know what that is.
Yeah, see that I'm not too sure. That I'd probably guess somewhere in the 90s, early 2000s, once the tech boom started happening.
That makes sense.
In
because they've got a strong infrastructure.
Yeah.
That adds up. Yes, I mean, where I think that's going to go, realistically, I think that China and the U.S. will continue to negotiate over how long it stays. It's sort of its own sovereign country, if you want to call it that. I think the reality is all of the world leaders, I know that there is some posturing, but there's obviously a lot of negotiating, and it's a very complex, integrated relationship. There's a lot of things at play, whether, you see sometimes they're freeing prisoners and loosening up money over here or doing this or that. And, it's not only economics and tech and development, it's resources. It's a lot of other things that come into play. And China seems to be doing okay in terms of working their way up the world leader ladder. But they're struggling right now financially. They try to cover it up, but it's pretty obvious. They're having a bit of a housing crisis. A lot of their people are going missing, which means that shit's kind of hitting the fan. They're cutting people off social media because they're talking about the struggles that China's currently having. Anyway, my point is, it's not all sunshine and roses over there.
No.
So why I'm saying that is they still need help from the United States. They don't necessarily need what Taiwan has, but they need assistance. So if the United States goes, hey, this is a matter of national security, we need to make sure we keep Taiwan for, say, 2 or 3 more years. What they're going to do is they're going to go negotiate with China. They're going to say, look, we need this for this long. We can see that you need these things. Here you go. And then that's not how it's going to look in the media. That's not how it's going to look to you and I, but that's what's going on, right? Because like you and I said, this is not up to Taiwan. It's not. It's either China takes them peacefully or it becomes a war. Mm-hmm. That's what it's going to be. I think that's how it's going to play out. I don't really know the timeline. Right now, they're going through an election. I think it's on January 13th. One is pro-China. One is more, let's call it pro-U.S., pro-freedom, if you will, just for lack of a better term. But I think at the end of the day, people believe that it's going to make a big difference. I don't think it is because, again, I don't think they have a choice in the matter. Really, I don't think they do. So I still think you're going to see Taiwan become a part of China. I believe what he's saying is accurate. I just don't think it's going to be for a few more years. I think maybe he's saying these things, maybe to just push the United States to start negotiating. Mm-hmm. Be like, hey, we're going to do this. So what can you offer me to hold off for however many years you need to rebuild your infrastructure in the United States? That's what I think.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. All right, moving on here. So, political scales continue tipping as just 3.4% of journalists identify as Republican. So, a recent study by Syracuse University titled The American Journalist Under Attack reveals a significant decline in the percentage of full-time U.S. journalists identifying as Republicans over the last decade. In 2022, only 3.4% of journalists identified as Republicans, compared to 36.4% as Democrats and 51.7% as independents. The survey, conducted nearly every decade, indicates a substantial decrease in the Republican representation within the journalism industry over the years. In the first survey in 1971, 25.7% of journalists said they were Republicans, while the 2013 study showed just 7.1%. So, what are your thoughts with how, we're seeing this across all institutions now, with whether it be education or journalism, all of this stuff. It's just, it almost seems like conservative thought is getting erased.
Yeah, so here's an interesting thing. Like, when you look at the difference in representation, you have a 10x representation. Now, if you look at the representation from university professors, you have a 10x difference in representation. Like you said, different institutions. Same in the medical. You see a lot of these things.
Tech.
Yeah, it's crazy in tech to me. But so I was writing something the other day, and it kind of dawned on me when I was going through this. What happened where the Democrats realized that everyone going through college university is young and idealistic. We all go through this phase where we don't have much, so we believe more in a socialist perspective. You know, I had that perspective for all of 15 minutes. I was like, oh, this is fucking stupid. This is not going to work. But it seems to be like a rite of passage. It's just part of life. Now, I think what they've done is they identified this. What they've got is they've got every student in America or Canada, wherever that goes to school, which is still a pretty large portion. They've got this opportunity to maintain the indoctrination and to keep them there. And it's really hard because if you want them to be Republican, you have to change their opinion. And we know how hard it is to change people's opinions. So I think that maybe 20, 30, 40 years ago, Democrats started realizing this. And that's why you had different representation back in the 70s, because people were just allowed to actually have more free thought. I think it's an indication of censorship and free thought in a big way. But I think around that 30, 40-year mark, the Democrats started identifying this and started implementing whatever tools or whatever systems they had to sort of keep people in that train of thought as they were graduating and getting into these other institutions and basically running the country and running the world. So I think this is just a symptom of that one big thing where, like you said, they've kind of infiltrated this post-secondary education system, and they've been able to use the media to feed this information to people. It kind of self-perpetuates. Use the media to feed this information to people. The right is bad, the left is good, and people never really change their mind. They never really wake up. I mean, there's that old saying, I'm going to butcher it a little bit. If you're under 30 and not a Democrat, you have no heart. Mm-hmm. If you're over 30 and not a Republican, you have no brain. It's because of a lot of things. I think the main reason is because of fiscal responsibility, and you actually need these things in place to run a country effectively. But that doesn't seem to be the thing anymore. Like they've managed to break that down, because that natural progress, that natural sort of progress, that linear path that I think people go through, which I said is a rite of passage to be a socialist as a kid, you break through that and you become a butterfly. You realize that there is a much better way to operate. Somehow the Democrats drew a line, put up blinders, and they're keeping everybody on the other side. And as they're doing that, it's just continuing to produce more and more of the same thing. It's just proliferating. I'm not sure how we get away from it. I'm not sure how we break this down. One way, again, because I believe that the best way to do things in a lot of cases is to go back to the root, go back where it starts. I think one way is to rebuild an education. This is a tall order, by the way. I'm not saying this like, this is not some throwaway. I know this takes a lot of work, but we need an alternative to the education system we have. And I think people are starting to do that. People are building a lot more private schools. They're building a lot more like like schools that are not for profit, that are just teaching kids another way. Getting away from all this sort of ideological crap, all the gender crap, all the stuff that I honestly don't want my kids being involved in. So people that are more moderate are now building these other systems. And as you start to do this and you have more of these schools that are teaching kids the actual life skills they need, you're going to get more people migrate there. And when that happens, then I think we're going to start bridging this gap. Until that happens, I don't see how we break this down, because they have the kids from 5 years old And they maintain this system until they graduate college, university, and now they've implemented an apparatus primarily through the media to keep them in the same frame of mind. So unless we start back here when they're young, I don't see how we flip this over.
Yeah. And to me, the main point that I think you mentioned on there that I see as being the big one is the moralization of political thought, of rational political thought. I mean, the conservatives and liberals, I've always looked at it as they need one another. Like, you need conservatives to make sure that the unintended consequences are thought of.
Yes.
But you need liberals to push the ideas forward. Like, what? You don't want to progress society? I consider myself a progressive person. Like, I want to see society progress. I also don't want to chase progress in such a way that actually ends up destabilizing society,
Right.
which I think we're doing right now. But it's, I can't help but to feel, and I've talked about this a lot online, about the infiltration of Marxist ideas within a lot of left-wing thought right now, and with, say, social justice ideology, all the DEI stuff, the gender stuff. If you really trace back those ideas and see where they started coming out of, you see that they started coming out of a lot of Marxist schools or philosophers and schools of thought. And what you see in all of those Marxist revolutions is the idea of counter-revolutionary thinking. So, and that was just like outlawed. And I think that's what we're seeing now from this very radical left-wing agenda, like that you see coming through all of these 2030 agenda, whether the sustainable and equitable goals, is that anything left of us is alt-right. Yeah. And anything, like, even I am somebody that's like, I don't like being called a conservative. I view myself as, I'd say, a liberal on happy days, a libertarian on most days, and an anarchist on angry days.
I consider myself politically unaffiliated.
But it's like,
but I get pigeonholed very fast.
Yeah, but like, all of those things aren't conservative to me. But I'll get labeled conservative because people think that conservative is like, it's now a derogatory term to put on somebody. Yep. Because it's insinuated with, okay, well, if you're conservative, you must be racist, or you must not want things to get better, or you're selfish, or any of these kind of things. And it's such a mind-numbing way of thinking to me. But I really do think that is the beginning of why even you see a lot of people not, say, whether it be conservatives or Republicans, whatever it be, not identifying as that anymore, because they've made the term effectively, and to their own credit, it's like, when in ideological warfare, they've done a great job. I'm not saying I approve of it, but they've done a great job of making anything that opposes them radioactive.
Yeah, I mean, they've actually done a really good job of that. I will give them credit for it. I think the Democrats just appear to be more organized in terms of their long game attack on the Republican or conservative side. But honestly, I 100% agree with you. Look, it would be great if we had political leaders that were able to balance both sides of sort of more social programs and fiscal responsibility. I don't know why we don't. But you're right, like, we need both sides. It's the yin and the yang. We do definitely need them. I think the problem is that most people believe, and this is a blind spot on both sides, they believe that we don't need the other side and that they've got things all wrong. And it's just not the truth. We would be better off if we had a leader, if we had like benevolent leaders for starters, that stopped sticking with the way things were. And what I mean by that, so it kind of came out a bit janky. What I mean by that is, you don't have to be hardlined. If you're in the States, it's easier. You don't have to be hardlined on abortion, or it used to be gay marriage, or all these. Like, look, you can have a nuanced approach to every piece of policy, and you can actually see it all in a very logical way, and you can run a more centered approach, centered campaign, and you could do more for the country as a leadership group, because then everybody kind of wins. I don't know why we don't do that. I think it's because, I think it's honestly just so the system can survive on its own. I think it's like the Purnell's ironclad law bureaucracy, where things just become more and more bureaucratic over time. And then what happens is the majority of the organization just exists to make sure the organization can continue to exist. I feel like that's politics in a nutshell, because this isn't really that challenging to resolve. But no, like you said, we really do need both sides. And with this kind of hard lean, what you get what you get when only 3.4% of journalists identify as Republican is you get a major representation issue. So what happens is the Democrats, in this case, I'm just saying specifically in this conversation, the Democrats in this conversation feel emboldened because they have power in numbers. Whereas a lot of the times the Republicans may feel like they have to do more radical things or be louder to be heard because there's so fewer voices. And it's not a good system, you know, and in Canada specifically, I mean, I know this is the US, we don't really have any right-wing publications. Like I said, National Post is probably the closest thing we have, and it's still center-left.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So, you know, it's just one more systemic problem we have in society that we need to fix from the beginning. And it starts with sort of rebuilding our education system and building a new generation of free thinkers.
Yeah, and understanding that too. Like, yeah, both sides can go too far. To me, ideas aren't the issue. It's unquestionable ideas are the issue. It's when one political ideology can't be questioned is when things start going terribly wrong. And there was actually it was the spokesperson for the Freedom Convoy way back in the day who said something I really enjoyed, which was, we should be trying to pursue liberal goals with conservative systems in order to reach libertarians' idea of freedom.
Yeah, nailed it.
And it's like, yeah, so to me, it's you know, you need the balance. And I mean, on a more cheesy aspect of it, it's like, whether it's you go to Taoism or whether you go to more like spiritual, like religious ideas and all of this kind of stuff, it all comes down to balance at the end of the day. And I think everything terrible comes out of, dogmatic visions of what is right and wrong. And yeah, you see that, I think, happening right now, which is scary, because even too, a lot of right-wing extremism, if you look at throughout history, a lot of right-wing extremism is in response to left-wing extremism. It's when even a lot of the stuff with fascists popping up in Europe throughout the early 1900s, they were posing themselves as the alternative to the communists. So it was when the left started pushing things extremely far, saying we want to completely disintegrate society as we know it and rebuild it from the ashes. That's when the fascists came in and said, we can't let them have all this power. You need to give all the power to us.
Right.
And then you just have these two now parties that are just completely at odds with one another, trying to go to war. And I'm like, I see that happening again, which is, to me, is the frightening aspect of both parties just thinking the other one is unquestionably evil and isn't worth negotiating with. And yeah, I don't know. It's a dangerous path.
I think one of the things that makes it worse, to be honest with you, and I don't really mean to call these guys out, but when you have guys like Justin Trudeau, when you have guys like Joe Biden, when you have guys like Donald Trump, these are not leaders that really represent the average liberal or the average conservative or Republican. It's inaccurate. Mm-hmm. And I think you need more well-balanced leadership to start bridging this gap so they can start having these conversations. You know, until then, I think stats like this 3.4%, I think all that means is it's going to just be harder and harder to find balance. It's going to be harder and harder to break through and stop this sort of wild liberal ideology that's becoming very extreme because they control the media. They're spreading the information that they want, the way they want. They're painting the picture they want to paint. And it makes it harder for people to get a more realistic view of reality. But I guess that's why we do what we do, right?
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So moving on here to the last topic of the day, global disinformation warfare, the censorship industrial complex exposed. So independent journalist Matt Taibbi has uncovered alarming methods used by a network of government and non-governmental organizations to control online information. Leaked documents from the Cyber Threat Intelligence League and a quote-unquote anti-disinformation group, disinformation group, exposed their aggressive censorship operation on the public. The documents, dubbed the CTI files, analyzed tactics used against foreign terrorist groups such as Al-Qaeda and ISIS that are now being applied domestically to prevent unwanted information from being published. Taibbi said that the sudden emergence of all these disinformation groups, both in government and in civil society, did not occur by accident. He believes that their appearance coincides with the development of the intent and its huge democratizing force in the world that created, quote-unquote, all sorts of political energy that was uncontrollable and gave rise to the Occupy Wall Street movement, the Tea Party, and the Arab Spring. So he went on to talk about how it seems that this censorship apparatus is being weaponized against anybody that appeals to what might actually be looked at as the public, looking out for public interests rather than, say, establishment interests. So he was talking about how this censorship apparatus targets, say, the likes of Bernie Sanders, just like it does Donald Trump. Anybody that threatens to either expose the truth about what's happening with these establishment forces or threatens them.
Right.
So to me, it's like going back to your ironclad law of bureaucracy, you see these, we talk about the military industrial complex, it's like these bureaucracies that were created in order to fight, say, overseas. Well, they didn't want to just lay off those tens of thousands of people that were doing that. But, okay, well, now we're not at war with Afghanistan anymore. So what are we going to do with all of you? And then the answer is, well, you know what? All right, let's just turn these on some people that we don't like at home. And to me, man, the whole idea of everybody tosses around the idea of like saving democracy at this point and all of this stuff. And I just can't help but look at it and just go like, democracy died a long time ago, if we ever even had it. And because, you know, to me, informed consent is a massive part about democracy. And if you don't know who you're voting for, what you're voting for, what the real consequences of what you're voting for are, then how can you say that we're acting democratically?
No, I mean, like, look, for me, the big issue here is this is just another organization that is there to carry out the American agenda. That's all this is. And it, you know, we talked about this in our last podcast. These people are not Democratic. They're not Republican. Right now, they're squashing a lot more Republican, you know, speech, but they're there for whatever the 40 or 50-year vision of America is. That's what they're doing. They do not care what they need to do to get their job done. They're the CTIL, the FBI, the CIA. They're just another apparatus that is just working in conjunction with these other three-letter organizations, even though this one's 4, to accomplish their goal. Because what happened was, like you said, Bernie Sanders, the Arab Spring, you look at Occupy Wall Street, this all happened because of a new form of media, right? It's all because of social media and social communication. So the FBI and the CIA were inadequate tools for this. Well, now they've got the tool they need. This is going absolutely nowhere. And, you know, it was interesting when I was reading this, you know, you get social media programs like Twitter or TikTok or Instagram, and what they do is they censor you, they demonetize or deplatform you, whatever it is. This group of people will not only do that, they will infiltrate your group. So they will get people to sign up. They will infiltrate your group of your whatever your organization is. Say it's a Republican group. They will infiltrate it with fake IDs somehow. You know what I mean? Like, it's social. It's not like I fake ID. You know what I mean? Fake accounts. And they will try to change the narrative, or they will try to break down your narrative. They will try to come inside and Trojan horse your shit. If that doesn't work, they will go to wherever you are sourcing your material from to sell your products, to keep your business alive. They will go to organizations. So if you're selling T-shirts, they will try. And this is documented. They're going to your manufacturer to say, stop working with these people, and they've got government power behind them, so they can get these things done. Or they're going to your provider, like PayPal started cutting off accounts through COVID. They'll just go to your provider and be like, you're not working with these people anymore. And you'll cut off your opportunity. They'll cut you off of the ball so you can't make any money, so you can't thrive, you can't survive. You know, these organizations are dangerous, and I think it's important that they're being uncovered. I just don't know what there is to do about it, because they can basically carry out their agenda with impunity. There's no way to stop them. And they're hiding behind this other agency, but because they're not one of the official ones with like the FBI or CIA, and because they don't own the social programs, they're just in there doing influencing. And when you're doing things like pretending to be someone else, like the FBI will go in, or the CIA, and you see this happen like in the Jan 6th riots. They're not willing to tell you how many people were a part of the United States government. They're not willing to tell you. They're like, could have been 5, could have been hundreds. Okay. But you know that they're there on the ground. So to me, this is the exact same thing, but it's a more focused group doing it online to break down whatever goes against their 50-year plan, like you said. I think it's wild that it's happening, but I'm not really surprised. Like, are you?
No. And I mean, too, I think a lot of people, when they think of war, they think of just specifically kinetic warfare, you know, down in the trenches type warfare, but fifth generation warfare has been declared as informational warfare. Like
Right.
it's a psychological warfare, and I don't even use that term lightly. I do think it's the battlegrounds for wars these days aren't fought. They're not trying to push political ideologies and agendas forward through force and through gunpowder. They're doing it through brainwashing, like literally. I'm going to inundate you with a single narrative, which is completely one-sided, or I'm just going to try to rob you of your natural right from freedom of speech to be opposed or see opposing views. I'm just going to rob you of that. I don't trust you to be able to listen to opposing views
Right.
and make up your own mind. Where, and this is one of those things that I point to a lot, is like, people will say, well, it's really important that they censor certain topics because those topics are so important that people can't be having false views on them. And then you just go like, okay, well, there's certain topics that are widespread, like say flat earthers. It's like there's no attempt to widespread censor and deplatform flat earthers.
No.
There's so many YouTube accounts with massive followings with flat earthers because it's a non-consequential topic to the establishment, I believe, where it's just
agree.
Where they're just like, even if people believe this, what does it fucking
I
matter
actually
to
think
me?
they like it because I think they can pigeonhole conspiracy theorists with flat earthers,
Exactly.
put them in the same group, and now they're all idiots.
Yeah.
So I actually think they let it happen. They want that shit to proliferate.
Yeah, exactly. And then, so to me, I think I do get scared with the future of, I mean, even now you see with AI, deepfake videos, all of this kind of stuff coming out now, where I'll even have friends send me memes of, say, like, just it's like a complete joke or something, but I can just tell by the way the video is moving compared to the audio. It's just like, oh, that's an AI generated. And I've caught, and friends have been like, oh shit, really? And like, so it's already starting to happen where people aren't going to be able to just discern reality from just complete fiction anymore. And so that to me is concerning.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I kind of noticed recently was that there are all these conflicts and all these issues around the world. And the governments, for some reason, are trying to be in control of everything. That's kind of their MO these days. Now, the only way you can do that is if you can control the media. And we're talking like medical system, economics, COVID, who to choose as a political leader. You take your pick. It really doesn't matter. They control the media with so much force, and they know how to do it. They're so good at it. It's like clockwork for these guys that they realize they can convince anybody of anything if they can give them the information that they want, right? Like you said, one of the biggest challenges they're having is that people on social media are starting to provide opposing views. So what they have to do is they're going, okay, AI is available, all these other tools are growing, social is growing. So if you think about it from a government's perspective, it's actually valuable because now you can reach more people faster. You can spread your whatever nonsense you need to spread, whatever your propaganda you're spreading, you can get at scale quicker to larger groups of people now. Well, this is pretty amazing. You know what I mean? That's good for the government. But now they've got to deal with all these people like you and I that kind of go, well, most of that's bullshit. So I think this is their effort to snuff out the guys like you and I saying most of that is bullshit, and then just be able to benefit from this system, which really is the media machine on steroids. Mm-hmm. So I think we're just going to continue to see more of these narratives around everything because, like I said, it permeates every industry. It's just kind of what it is. I think we're going to continue to see more of these things, and this organization is going to do whatever they can from an offensive perspective to stop people like you and I from challenging what they're obviously trying to do.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I think that's just the way this is going to go. Again, like we've talked about this, I think the cat and mouse is what's the next tool? You know, I think it's Web3, or I think it's sort of like decentralized social media. I think that's kind of what it is. I don't know how they're going to get there. I don't know how they will figure that one out, but I'm sure they will eventually. That's just kind of the way I see it going, I guess. You know, it's just one more government organization that seems to be all over the world. I think it's in like 86 countries. Yeah. So, again, they convince people they're doing the right thing and that you and I are doing the wrong thing. And then they just use any means necessary, whether legal or illegal, to make sure that we can't spread our ideas or our voices, because they need to do that in order to save democracy. Here we are.
Yeah, and just before wrapping up here, just a good reminder that you know, if you're against censorship, you got to be against it when it's used against your enemies too, and ideas you don't like as well. You know, it's I mean, we're seeing it now where all of a sudden there's a lot of people, for instance, on the left that are getting real upset about censorship happening in the name of Palestine and shutting down, say, free speech for Palestinians or the Palestinian cause. And it's like, hey, I sympathize with that. I think you should be able to. Would have been nice if you were also able to, you know, support our cause whenever we were getting censored throughout all the COVID bullshit, but vice versa as well. It's like, you know, there was a lot of conservatives and a lot of so quote unquote freedom fighters or whatever that, or truthers or whatever it be, that all of a sudden were real quiet when it went the other way and it was being weaponized against their opponents. All of a sudden they weren't as upset. So,
Of course.
so, you know, yeah, got to, protecting free speech means protecting speech you don't like as well. So, anything else you wanted to add for today?
No, that's it.
All right. Well, don't forget to rate and subscribe to wherever you're listening, and check us out on socials. And yeah,
That's it. Thanks. Bye, everybody.
all right.